that happens in young people's theatre with young people with quite profound and multiple impairments, sensory and learning impairments, the kinds of children and audiences that many people throughout the world wouldn't even consider as audiences because their level of cognition and ability to respond seems very limited. But through the work of people like Oily Cart and Bamboozle, theatre companies for young people in the UK, we've demonstrated that most exceptional work can happen for those audiences. We need to profile that, and we need people around the world to recognise we're world leaders. And I think if we're influencing those abroad who are saying, yes, please bring the work from the UK to us, then it will help us survive in the UK. What's your artistic approach to making work, either for, by or about disabled people? How do you make decisions about form and content? I won't go into this in huge depth. Seeing access, disability access, not as a bolt-on, not as a pain, not as a problem or a nuisance, but actually as a stimulus to the aesthetic. So, for example, integrating sign language into performance, audio description into performance, looking at how we make narratives understandable to people with learning disabilities, can actually lead to a very rich, multi-sensory, innovative kind of theatre that actually works for everybody. That's one element of the approach, and the other is is visibility of disabled people, telling stories that are about disabled people's journeys, things that are hidden. I have a very strong belief that a lot of depictions of disabled people in art have been negative, and we know, don't we, from very often the only disabled character in a story, and particularly stories for children or stories children will watch, is the baddie, whether it be Captain Hook or Richard III or the Bond villains and so on, or Tragic and Brave, as in the kind of Helen Keller stories. So I kind of, true story obviously, I am interested in starting with the truth of disabled people's experiences, but also looking at narratives that are rich if reinterpreted by disabled artists. So, for example, what happens if you retell Hansel and Gretel, and Hansel is autistic and being lost in the woods has an extra resonance and an extra meaning? What is a perception of disability arts within the theatre community in your country? Is work valued and recognised? More so than ever, there is still a struggle for what we would call the mainstream in the UK to sit up and take notice. I would point to Jenny Seeley's work with Grey Eye. Jenny is now the director of Deaf Woman, who is the director of the opening ceremony of the Paralympics, so that's kind of a major gig for disabled artists. To my knowledge, no one from our National Theatre has ever seen any of her 5-star productions in theatres that are a heartbeat away from their building. So they're not waking up and taking notice in terms of the big institutions, but the producing theatres, for example, the Theatre Royal Stratford East, which has a wonderful tradition in this country, was Joan Littlewood's theatre, as many people who are listening to this will know, has been co-producing with Grey Eye, and we are starting to see disabled artists on our main stages as opposed to on our fringe, and so that there is some movement there. Do you think we will see an improvement in the education of artists in the subject of disability arts? How should this happen? In some respects it is happening and growing. There's a field of work that's happening in our universities called applied theatre. That's what I used to call community theatre in this country, but applied theatre, but it does tend to have a kind of charitable model, and it's about using theatre and drama, if not precisely for therapeutic purposes, for social purposes. So the objective is, if you like, instrumental rather than intrinsic. The objective is to improve communication, to improve community cohesion, and so forth. A lot of I would say the vast majority of students taking those courses are non-disabled, and I have some questions about whether that's a very inclusive model. It's very, very, very hard for disabled artists to get proper training and proper recognition, and that's something we need to attend to. And as our government is retrogressive in terms of disability rights and rights generally. The word entitlement has become a dirty word in the UK. So is another word for rights, isn't it? So we will find, I think, fewer and fewer disabled students. Although there has been the smallest bit of recognition, for example, in our drama schools, the old-fashioned ways of operating, which were about 5 years ago, for example, deaf people not getting into drama school because they wouldn't reach the singing requirement, mobility impaired people not reaching them, the movement requirement and all that kind of thing. That seems to be breaking down a little bit, very slowly. Again, we start with recognising the great work that's happening, by disabled artists now, and just making a case and shouting about it, I think. What artistic training is available currently for artists with disabilities? Yes, bits and pieces, work within the companies. So Grey Eye will do a lot, as will all kinds of other companies, will sort of professional theatre companies and dance companies. Inclusive dance is very strong in the UK. Companies such as Canduco and Stopgap Dance and Magpie Dance and so on. There's a strong tradition of it. But in terms of the professional structures, in terms of the degree courses, in terms of the drama schools and the dance schools, it's still very, very marginal, and no one is really pressurising those people to give full professional training. So disabled artists, tend to get trained on the job and in small courses that are set up by those people who care about it. Should there be policies which support the inclusion of artists with disabilities within the professional arts? How do we ensure we have an inclusive arts sector? Well, yes, I think there should be. If you receive public money, you should be working for the whole cross-section of the community, and we do have, public. Actually, even if you're using private money, there should be, anti-discrimination legislation as there is in any kind of employment, and we as a society have an obligation and a duty to pay to remove the barriers that stop disabled people participating fully. We do have discrimination legislation. We now call it the Equality Act, that covers, as well as disability, gender and race and culture and age, and so on, and any kind of discrimination against something which is to do with something that's to do with a person's background or how they were born. It doesn't have enough teeth. It's at the moment, and I think it really needs some test cases. I feel one way to start is to get film, TV and theatre embarrassed by non-disabled people playing disabled characters. There is a kind of a joke in the UK, and I'm guessing elsewhere in the world, that the best way to get an Oscar is for a non-disabled actor to pretend to be disabled. The Dustin Hoffmans, the Daniel Day-Lewises and so forth. I'd like to see that being as unacceptable as blacking up. In your opinion, how much have societal attitudes changed in the last 5 to 10 years? Have the arts helped in this shift? Yes, there has been, I think, shifts in attitude, and I think the arts have played their part in an overall inclusion movement. We talk about, in the UK, adopting the social rather than the medical model of disability, that what we're trying to do is to campaign to have not just the physical barriers that prevent participation being pulled down, but also the attitudinal barriers. What we might say the problem is stairs, physically staircases, and stairs, people looking at you. Inclusive education, of course, is very important to that, and we still have segregated special schools, where schools are supposedly inclusive. They're not always, because the disabled students very often don't receive the support that they're entitled to participate, and are segregated in a unit within a school, and seen differently as a kind of ghettoisation. So arts projects can do a lot in terms of bringing young people together in schools, disabled, non-disabled young people together, in order to understand each other and create friendship groups and so on. So many disabled people grow up with disabled people, and their friendship groups are that. So many non-disabled people don't have any contact with disabled people because of this history of segregation. So the more we can do about changing that, the better. What should the arts concern itself with next, which builds on previous developments in the area of disability arts? Shouting about the good work, saying, look, this is just high quality art. Where it's not high quality art and tries to get away with it with a, well, of course it's not very good because of all the difficulties and problems that disabled people have, blah, blah, blah. We should be robust, we should be critical, and we should look to make sure that there's quality always. And we should hammer away at the mainstream organisations which in the UK have a great deal of public subsidy. Our National Theatre, for example, has £20 million worth of annual subsidy. I wouldn't be suggesting imposing quotas, but I would be suggesting that they should be embarrassed if they've not got disabled representation on their board of management, if they don't have disabled artists working in the building, and if they're not going to see the great work that's happening, to be asked very robustly why not. Because how do you know? Because they'll come back with a quality argument. They'll say it's not our fault, there's no training involved, blah blah blah. So I say go and see a Grey Eye production, go and see an Oily Cart production, go and see a Kazoom production, go and see Kanduko and Stopgap, and think of creative ways of engaging with these remarkable artists. There is a flawed programme called Unlimited, which is part of the Cultural Olympiad, which is happening right now, summer 2012, which is about profiling the best of disabled artists, and some of that will be on the South Bank outside our National Theatre. I will be disgusted if the senior management of the National Theatre don't step outside their building and see that work. Grayo's production of Reasons to be Cheerful will literally be two building, in the South Bank Centre at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, 2 doors down from the National Theatre. There's a wonderful production by a learning disabled artist called Jez Colburn, which is called Irresistible, which, again, they should be seeing there. There's lots of that work all happening on the South Bank. I don't know whether pressure is being put on the right people in those big buildings to go and see that work, but it should be. Do you have any suggestions about how theatre organisations can make both short-term and long-term developments in the area of inclusivity? I think you need to do the practical planning and management things so that it doesn't become an empty aspiration but becomes something that you do. So you make inclusion a core value of your organisation. You say, well, this is our duty as a cultural body to be inclusive of everybody in society, and there's this group of people that have traditionally been excluded, so we are going to do this. So you make a commitment, and you back it with a strategic plan which is financed. So you cannot do everything all at once, but you can do something, and you can do something tomorrow. So I would suggest, and that's monitored by your management and reported on and is public and transparent. So you go, okay, this year what we will do is we will commit to making every endeavour to make, I don't know, every one of our shows will have at least one performance which is autism friendly, so that we're going to make sure that we don't mind if there's involuntary noises in our audience. We're going to look at sign language interpreting. We're going to look at how we market to make sure disabled people are coming. We're going to look at our parking. We're going to look at our transport. Do the whole access audit of your organisation, and over 3, 5, 10 years you can transform your organisation, but you can't do it all tomorrow. So I would suggest an incremental strategic plan. Do you have something important to add that we didn't ask? No. I've eaten up 22 minutes and 7 seconds on this video. I'm sure that's quite enough of hearing me talking, and I look forward to further dialogue. and conversations. Nice to speak to you all. Goodbye from London.